In the center of the galaxy, there was a powerful empire called the Dravari Empire. They ruled over many planets and star systems. They were strong, proud, and full of warriors. Their queen, Zira, was feared by all. She believed strength was everything, and she believed humans were weak. Earth had joined the Galactic Council only recently. Humans were new to space, new to war, and new to power. The Dravari laughed at them, especially Queen Zira. To her, humans were insects, small, slow, and soft. But then came Commander Raylan. He was the human ambassador to the Dravari. He was tall, but not big like the Dravari warriors. He didn't wear armor or carry weapons. He wore a plain black suit and walked calmly. His face showed no fear, no emotion, just silence. Queen Zira watched him from her throne. 1,000 warriors stood around her, and the crowd filled the arena. She wanted to test him, to humiliate him, so she made a decision that would change everything. She raised her hand and said loudly, "This human dares to stand in my court. He thinks he is equal, so I will give him a challenge." She turned to her strongest general, Vale, her best warrior. Tall, sharp, powerful, she had never lost a duel. Her arms were covered with scars from battles, and her eyes burned like fire. "Vale," said the queen, "show this human our strength. Defeat him in front of all. Make him bow." The crowd cheered, shouting Vale's name. They were ready for a show. They wanted to see blood. They wanted to see the human crawl. Raylan looked up slowly. His voice was quiet but clear. "I accept," he said. Gasps filled the air. Was he serious? He didn't even have a weapon. Some thought he was a fool. Others thought he was brave, but most believed he was already dead. Vale stepped into the arena, her armor shining under the sun. She pulled out her energy blade, a glowing weapon of war. Raylan stepped forward too. He didn't run, didn't shake, didn't speak. He only looked at her. A bell rang, and the duel began. Vale moved fast, faster than any human could see. She swung her blade toward Raylan's head, but Raylan moved, just slightly, and the blade missed him by an inch. She attacked again, spinning and slashing. But Raylan ducked, turned, and stepped aside each time. He didn't attack, he only dodged. He was reading her like a book. The crowd began to whisper, "What is he doing? Why is he not fighting back? Is this a joke?" Vale growled. "Fight me, coward." Raylan said nothing. His eyes stayed locked on hers. She charged again, using all her strength, but Raylan dropped to one knee, rolled forward, and stood behind her. She turned fast, but too late. Raylan had already touched the back of her neck with 2 fingers, then stepped away again. The duel stopped. Silence filled the arena. Raylan had not harmed her, but he had clearly won. He could have broken her neck if he wanted to. Everyone saw it. Even the Queen Zira stood up, her face red with anger and disbelief. Her best warrior defeated by a weak human, and not by strength, but by calm, controlled skill. She wanted to scream, to order Raylan's death, but the rules were clear. This was a sacred duel, and the winner could not be punished. Vale was still on one knee, breathing hard. She looked up at Raylan, her pride broken. She had never lost before. She had never been made to look small. Raylan looked down at her and finally spoke. "I did not come to fight, but I will defend my people." Then he turned to Queen Zira. He gave a short bow, not out of fear, but respect, and then he walked out of the arena. The Dravari were silent. No one laughed, no one cheered. They had seen something, knew something they didn't understand. The queen clenched her fists. This human had not just beaten her warrior. He had embarrassed her before the entire empire. And now by law, she had to obey the duel's outcome. She had to give the victor his prize, and what he asked for would change everything. General Vale stood in the training hall alone, her blade resting on the floor beside her. She had not spoken to anyone since the duel. No one dared approach her, not even the queen's guards. Her hands were still shaking, not from fear but confusion. How could she, the champion of the Dravari, lose to a human? A human with no weapon, no armor, and no aggression. She remembered every move he made, every step he took. Raylan was slow yet fast, weak yet untouchable. He moved like water soft but unstoppable. No wasted movement, no sign of fear. He had seen everything she did before she even did it. Like he was reading her mind. Meanwhile, the Queen sat in her chamber, still burning with shame. The Council had watched the duel, and now whispers were spreading. Whispers that humans were not as weak as once believed. Whispers that Queen Zira had misjudged them. And whispers, worst of all, that the Queen's greatest warrior was no longer unbeatable. To crush those whispers, the Queen made a bold decision. She called for Raylan again, this time in private. Raylan entered the throne room with the same calm steps as before. The Queen's eyes locked on his, full of ice. He did not flinch. "You have humiliated my champion," she said, her voice sharp. "You showed no strength, yet you won. What do you want in return for your victory?" Raylan looked around, then answered, "I want peace. I want no war between Earth and the Dravari Empire." His words echoed across the chamber. Simple words, but powerful, too powerful. The Queen stared at him for a long time, then laughed coldly. "You ask for peace, but give me shame. You fight without fighting and win without honor." "Fine," she said, her voice filled with venom. "You will have your peace, but by the law of the sacred duel. The loser must offer something equal in value. I give you my General Veil. You beat her. Now you will own her. She will become your mate, as is our ancient rule. Let's see how long your peace lasts with her by your side," Raylan said. Nothing for a moment, then nodded once. He did not smile, did not show emotion. The Queen hated that more than anything else. He never gave her power over him. That made him dangerous. News spread quickly. The human had not only defeated General Veil, but now she would be bound to him by law. Some called it a joke, others a punishment, but one thing was clear: Veil did not agree to it willingly. The next day, she was brought to Raylan's ship, standing stiff with rage. She said nothing, but her glare was a sword by itself. Raylan greeted her with the same quiet nod. He opened the door and said, "Welcome aboard," then turned and walked. In expecting her to follow, she did, but not because she wanted to. She had to, as the ship left Dravari space. Veil stood near the window. Arms crossed, she refused to speak. Raylan did not push her. He simply piloted the ship with smooth, steady hands. Hours passed, and the silence between them grew heavier. Not angry, just strange. It was not the silence of enemies. It was the silence of two warriors who didn't understand each other yet. Finally, Veil spoke, her voice low but sharp. "Why didn't you finish me when you had the chance?" Raylan glanced at her, then looked forward again. "I didn't need to," he said. "You were already defeated." That answer made her fists tighten, but also made her heart pause. Not from fear, but confusion again. Was this human truly strong, or just clever? She didn't know, and it bothered her deeply. As the stars passed by the window, Veil began watching Raylan, not with hate but curiosity. He moved like a soldier, not a diplomat. Every step, every choice, every breath was measured. She realized he had not won by accident. He had studied her, planned, and acted only when the moment was right. It was not luck, it was skill, silent skill. And for the first time in her life, Veil felt something she had never felt toward an enemy. Not fear, not respect, not yet, but interest. This human was not like others. And maybe, just maybe, he was more dangerous than she thought. Not because of his strength, but because of his silence. Queen Zira did not sleep that night. She sat on her throne in silence, the cold fire of shame burning behind her golden eyes. Every moment of the duel played over and over in her mind. The crowd's silence, Veil kneeling, the human walking away. Without a scratch, the court had turned quiet not out of respect, but out of confusion, and confusion always led to weakness. Across the empire, whispers moved faster than light. The warrior queen had been challenged and outplayed, not by a superior force, not by a powerful enemy, but by a calm man with no weapon and no roar, a man who fought like a shadow and spoke like a diplomat, a man who never bowed, never begged, and never blinked. Zira's pride, the sharpest weapon in her arsenal, was wounded beyond repair. She had given her word under sacred law, but the taste of it was bitter. Giving her best general to a human felt like a punishment she never expected to suffer herself. Now the Empire watched her. They waited, they judged, and that made her angry, angrier than any war had ever made her, because this battle had not been fought with fleets or armies. It had been fought with silence and won with calm, and that was a language she had never learned to speak. In her private chambers, she sent a message to the High Priest of Law. She demanded to find a loophole, a backdoor, a way to undo the bond between Vale and the human. But the answer came quickly, and it was final. The law was clear, the duel was true, and the outcome was binding. She could not kill him, she could not undo the pairing. All she could do was watch as her champion left, with the man who had beaten her without throwing a punch. A part of her considered sending a spy, or worse, a hidden assassin. But even that idea faded quickly, not because she feared war with Earth, but because deep inside, some part of her was afraid of him. Commander Raylan, he was not what he seemed. No one that quiet could be ordinary. He had stared down her throne like he had seen empires fall before. And perhaps he had out among the stars. The ship carrying Vale and Raylan drifted toward Earth. Vale sat in silence, but her silence was different now. It was no longer full of rage. It was full of questions she didn't want to ask. Raylan worked in the command room, studying reports, scanning galactic charts, and sending peaceful updates to Earth's diplomatic command. His hands moved with military discipline, his eyes sharp and alert. Vale watched him for hours, unnoticed. She hated how steady he was. He was not acting like someone who had just won a war prize. He didn't gloat, didn't flirt, didn't try to control her. In fact, he barely acknowledged her unless necessary. When food was served, he placed her share neatly at the table and walked away. When she trained in the ship's gym, he didn't watch, didn't challenge her. He gave her space and let her be. And that made her feel something strange, unbalanced. On the fifth day, she spoke without looking at him. Is this how humans treat their enemies? Raylan, seated at a console, paused. We treat our allies with respect, he said. And we treat our enemies with caution. And me? She asked, her voice tight. You haven't decided yet, he replied. That answer sat heavy in the air. She didn't know how to respond, because he was right. She didn't know what he was anymore. A foe, a rival, a husband by law. Or something more dangerous than all of those. At night, in the dark of the ship, Vale opened a secure data port. She began searching old Earth records, trying to find Raylan's history. But most of his files were locked, military sealed, redacted. Only his rank was public. Commander, Earth Special Recon. A title given to shadow units that handled war missions no one spoke of. The kind of soldiers who ended wars before they began. The kind who disappeared when things got too messy for politics. He had not been chosen as a diplomat. He had been sent. Her blood turned colder than space. This man, this weak human, was not a man of peace. He was a weapon pretending to be calm. And the Queen had handed him the key to Dravari pride. Vale felt no anger now, only something deeper. Something that hurt worse. She felt the sting of being used. Not by Raylan, but by the Queen herself. She looked out the window toward Earth, a planet she had once laughed at. Now, she wasn't sure if she was going there as a prisoner, a spy, or something else. But one thing was certain. This war wasn't over. It was only changing shape. And the next battle would not be fought with swords. It would be fought with trust, pride, and choices. And maybe, just maybe, with something neither of them expected. The Earth sky was soft and blue when the ship entered its orbit. Clouds drifted gently beneath the stars, and the planet below looked peaceful. But inside the ship, peace was far away. Vale stood near the window, silent, her arms crossed like armor. She had seen 100 planets, but this one made her feel unsure. It was quiet, too quiet. And Raylan hadn't spoken to her since they entered Earth space. The ship landed in a quiet valley, far from the city. There were no soldiers, no welcome banners, no guards, just a calm breeze and the sound of wind moving through tall green trees. Raylan stepped off the ramp first, his boots crunching against the soil. Vale followed, her eyes scanning everything, expecting the trap. But there was no trap, no tricks. Only a small house made of stone and glass, and a garden filled with soft light. "This is where you'll stay," Raylan said, not looking at her. "You're free to leave the house, but I'd recommend not wandering too far yet." "I don't run," she said, her voice sharp. Raylan nodded once and walked ahead, unlocking the door. The air inside was warm, full of strange earth, smells, wood, spice, and something sweet, it felt. Lived in, but not recently, like someone had once called it home, but not anymore. Vale moved through the rooms slowly, her fingers touching the walls like she was reading them. No cameras, no hidden guards, no chains, only silence and space. She didn't understand it. Why wasn't he trying to control her, mock her, or remind her of the bond forced upon them? Why was he acting like none of this mattered? She found him in the back of the house, setting 2 plates on a table. He gestured to a chair but didn't speak. She sat, mostly to show she wasn't afraid. The food was simple bread, vegetables, a strange warm drink. She didn't trust it at first, but when he took a bite, she did too. It wasn't poison. It was just dinner. "This isn't how your people treat prisoners," she said finally. "You're not a prisoner," he replied without looking at her. "You're here because of a mistake." Her eyes narrowed. "A mistake?" "The Queen thought marriage would humiliate us both," he said. "But I don't care about her games." "Then why follow the law?" Raylan looked up at her for the first time in hours. "Because I'm not like her," that answer stayed. In the air, heavier than silence, Vale didn't know what to say. No one had ever treated her like this before, like a person, not a symbol, even among her own kind. She had been a weapon first, a warrior, a name, a blade, not a woman, not a voice. Just a tool used by power. Days passed, slow and strange. Each morning, Raylan woke early and worked on his comms or studied maps. Each evening, he cooked, cleaned, and said little. He never raised his voice, never gave orders, never touched her. He gave her space, but also routine. And that routine began to feel real. Vale trained in the backyard, her muscles aching from long hours alone. One morning, Raylan joined her, not to fight, just to move beside her. He followed her drills quietly, matching her stance, copying her forms. He wasn't perfect, but he learned fast. And for the first time, she saw something familiar in him: discipline, pain, patience. It wasn't warrior pride, it was something deeper. The kind of strength that didn't need to shout to be seen. That night, they sat on the rooftop, looking at the stars. Earth's sky was full of them, too many to count. Vale broke the silence first, her voice softer than she expected. "Your people?" "They fight quietly," Raylan nodded. "Loud warriors die first." She didn't laugh, but she didn't disagree either. She looked at him sideways, really looked at him. The calm eyes, the careful words, the silent strength. He wasn't weak, not even close. He just didn't carry his strength like a blade. He carried it like a burden. "I was raised to fight until nothing was left," she said quietly. "And if I won, I was told I mattered." Raylan didn't reply, but she knew he understood. She could see it in his silence. The days became weeks, and something inside Vale began to shift. She still didn't trust this place or this peace, but she no longer looked at Raylan with anger. Now, when she watched him, she felt something far more dangerous. She felt curiosity, respect, maybe even a strange sense of safety, but she couldn't say that out loud. Not yet, not to him, not to herself. Because if this forced bond became real, it would mean the Queen's punishment had backfired, and Vale was starting to fear that more than any battlefield. The storm came in the middle of the night, Not from the sky, but from a dream. Vale woke up breathless, sweat on her skin, her fists clenched around nothing. In the dream, she had been back in the arena. But this time, it was not Raylan she fought, it was herself. Every strike she threw, her mirror struck back harder. Every scream was met with silence, and she lost, again and again, to the same quiet face. She stood at the window and looked out at Earth's calm moonlit fields. She didn't belong here. Not in this quiet place, not in this house, not in this life. But the strange part was she didn't want to leave, not yet. Something here held her. Something she didn't understand. Raylan was already awake, seated at his desk, going over reports. He worked like a machine, focused, clean, cold. But Vale had learned to look beyond the surface. She had begun to notice little things. How he stared at the same file too long sometimes. How his hands paused when old names came up on the screen. How he would glance at her when he thought she wasn't watching. She waited until he left the room, then approached his private console. She told herself it was strategy. She was still a general, still bound to protect her people, even if from a quiet human husband. She entered a silent override code she had memorized back on the ship. And the screen blinked once, then opened. The files were locked, but not all of them. She found records of missions from long ago, marked black, red, and gray. She didn't understand the color code, but the names on the lists were familiar. Pirate clans, rebel lords, even a few Dravari war cells, all eliminated by Unit Echo 9. She searched deeper, bypassing one block at a time, until she found it, his name, Commander Raylan Voss, leader of Echo 9. Earth Special Recon. He had been more than a diplomat. He had led assassinations, sabotage ops, peacekeeper cleanups, hostage extractions. His file listed over 50 missions, successful. Silent and invisible, she scrolled through the battle logs, and her breath slowed. There were no medals, no news articles, no speeches, just names of enemies, marked as neutralized or dismantled. Raylan had ended wars before they ever started, and no one had known. He was a ghost in the galaxy, and the Queen had given him a weapon he never asked for her. Vale stepped back from the console, her chest tight. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of how wrong she had been. She had thought she was watching a weak man adapt to a warrior's world. But the truth was worse. She had been living with a predator who no longer needed to show his teeth. And somehow, she didn't feel hate. She felt seen. When Raylan returned, he knew something had changed. He didn't ask what she had done. He didn't check the terminal. He just looked at her and said, "I tried to leave that part of me behind." Vale met his eyes, her voice cold but honest. "Why?" Raylan shrugged. "Because peace is harder than war. And because war always takes more than it gives." She studied him then, not as a soldier or a husband, but as something else, something she didn't yet have a name for. He wasn't proud of what he had done, but he wasn't ashamed either. He had killed, not for glory, but for necessity, and now he wanted silence, not to hide, but to heal. That night, Vale didn't go to her own room. She stayed near the fire, watching. It burned low. Raylan sat across from her, silent as always. But the silence was no longer a wall, it was a bridge. "I read your mission on Kale 7, she said, barely louder than the flames. "The one where you stopped a civil war without firing a shot." He nodded slowly. "One of my last." She tilted her head. "You could have been a hero." "I don't want to be remembered for killing well," he answered. "I'd rather be forgotten for doing the right thing." The fire popped gently, throwing light across their faces, and in that moment, Vale understood something deeper than any order or law. Raylan hadn't fought her to prove a point. He had done it because he had to, and every move he made since then had been a choice, one shaped by a past he no longer wanted, but could never escape. She looked away, her heart pounding in her chest, not from fear, but from realization. This human was not weak, not quiet, not simple. He was everything she had been taught to destroy, and yet, somehow, she was beginning to want to understand him instead. Not as a warrior, not as an enemy, but as something else entirely. The sky turned red before the world knew what was coming. A silent alarm blinked on Raylan's console. No sound, just light. He stood slowly, eyes narrowed. Reading the signal, it came from one of Earth's outer colonies, a place peaceful, quiet, and poorly defended. Now it was gone, just gone. Vale watched him from across the room. The change in his posture told her more than any words could. He didn't panic, he didn't shout, he just stared, as if he had been waiting for this day. She stepped closer, not as a soldier but as someone who now understood what silence could mean. "What is it?" she asked. His answer was a single name, Karath. The word hit her like a cold blade. Karath were ancient, brutal, and merciless, a race that had been banished beyond the edge of known space, born in darkness, shaped by war, and addicted to conquest. They didn't take prisoners, they didn't make deals, they didn't even speak. They just destroyed. Raylan brought up a star map, watching red dots multiply across the screen. 3 colonies lost, then 5, then 7. No warnings. No survivors, only static. Earth's military was already preparing, but they were slow, too slow. They weren't ready, but he was. "We have to go," he said. "To the outer belt now." Vale didn't argue. She didn't ask questions. Her warrior instincts kicked in, and for the first time, she and Raylan moved as one. There was no need to discuss strategy. He knew the enemy, and she knew how to fight. Together, they loaded the ship in silence. This time, not as strangers, not as enemies, but as a unit. When their ship broke the atmosphere, Earth shrank behind them, peaceful and unaware. Ahead, chaos waited. Vale read the live reports flooding in Karath cruisers cutting through fleets like paper. Colonies falling within hours. Raylan's voice was steady as he called Earth Command. "This is Commander Raylan Voss, reactivating emergency status under Protocol Shadow Red." "Authorization confirmed," came the reply. He looked at Vale, his expression unreadable. "We're back in the war." Their ship jumped into the belt of debris that was once a colony. There were no bodies, no signs of battle, just the floating silence of death. Then the radar flashed multiple contacts, moving fast, closing in. Karath ships were like nightmares. All sharp angles and red lights. They didn't fly like normal vessels. They hunted. Raylan didn't flinch. He dove into the flight controls. Vale took the weapons seat, her fingers flying across the interface. "You ever used Dravari weapons?" she asked. "No," he said calmly. "But I've studied them," and in seconds he proved it. Their ship danced between Karath beams, fired tight bursts, and dodged with impossible timing. Raylan flew like a man who had made peace with death, and Vale fought like someone finally free to burn. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Each trusted the other without question. 2 warriors from different worlds, finally fighting the same war. After the 4th enemy ship exploded, Vale looked over at him, breathing hard. "You used to do this all the time, didn't you?" He gave a small nod. "This used to be my life. And now?" He hesitated for just a second. "Now I do it for Earth. And for you." Her heart skipped, and she hated that it did. But there was no time to feel anything. A massive shadow loomed ahead, the Karath command ship, 10 times larger than theirs. "We can't take that head on," she said. "We don't need to," he replied. Raylan triggered a deep stealth system hidden in their ship, something only Earth's Black Ops units used. They vanished from Karath sensors, slipping beneath the enemy radar like a ghost. Their mission wasn't to win the battle. It was to survive long enough to send proof of the Karath threat to Earth, to unite the planet before the storm arrived. As they moved in the shadows, Vale turned to him. "You think Earth will listen?" "They have to," he answered. "And the Queen?" Raylan's eyes darkened. "She'll listen when she realizes I wasn't Earth's strongest weapon. I was just the first one sent." They reached the edge of the battlefield, launched the data beacon, and turned to face the enemy. They wouldn't outrun the Karath, and they knew it. But they weren't afraid, not anymore. Vale stood beside him in the weapon bay. Blade in hand, If this is where we fall, she said, at least we fall together. Raylan looked at her, really looked. And for the first time, he smiled not. Cold, not fake, but real. We're not falling, he said. We're just getting started. And as the Karath ships closed in, the stars above them burned brighter because two warriors were ready, not to survive, but to change the war itself. The throne room was colder than ever. Queen Zira sat alone, wrapped in shadows, watching the stars beyond her palace windows. News from the front lines came fast and dark. Her empire was losing ground. The Karath were stronger, faster, and more brutal than anyone had guessed. And Earth, led by that silent human and the fallen warrior Vale, was fighting back with a fire she had never seen before. Vale stood beside Raylan on the battlefield, no longer just a general or a prisoner. She was something new, stronger, fiercer, and freer. Her armor was battle-worn. Her eyes sharper. She moved with purpose, fighting not for a queen's command, but for something she had found deep inside, a new loyalty, a new family. The queen's voice was cold when she summoned Vale back to the palace. You have betrayed your people, she said. Vale met her gaze without fear. I have found what you never understood, she answered. Strength is not only in the blade. It is in the choice to stand for what is right. Raylan entered behind her, calm as ever. The queen's eyes flicked between them, bitterness and disbelief burning in her heart. You think you have won? She hissed. This war is not over, Vale smiled, a slow, fierce smile. No, Your Majesty, she said, but we have changed the rules. Together. The final battle was not a clash of swords, but a war of wills, Raylan's strategies. And Vale's courage rallied Earth's forces and the scattered Dravari loyalists. They struck the Karath fleet with precision, turning desperation into hope in the center of the fight. Vale faced the Karath commander, a monstrous being, larger and crueler than anyone she had fought. Their blades clashed, sparks flying. But Vale fought with more than skill. She fought with heart, with the strength of a warrior who had chosen her own path. Raylan joined her, their movements perfectly synchronized. Not just allies, but partners. The Karath commander fell, defeated not by numbers, but by unity. The battle ended with Earth and Dravari standing side by side. No longer enemies, but something stronger, friends. The queen watched it all unfold. Her empire changed by a human and a warrior she had tried to break. Her pride was wounded, but a new respect grew in its place. She called Vale back to the throne, not as a soldier, but as a voice of peace. And in that moment, Vale knew her punishment had become her greatest gift. Raylan and Vale stood together before the galaxy, no longer prisoner and victor, but something far rarer, partners bound not by law, but by choice. And in their silence, the galaxy heard a new promise, that even in the darkest wars, hope could rise, and that strength was always more than just power.